Hello, the BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. And I've got no rhythm. And today I'm going to do, well, kind of a book a dozen. So Charlotte Malloy did a video. Thank you, Charlotte. You should check her out. I'll put a link to her video below about the Ultimate Booker long list, going back throughout the history of Booker and coming out with 12 books. And then Scott at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, one of the first people I followed on BookTube. He's still absolutely killing it. Definitely go find him if you haven't already. He sort of tried to tagify this and talked about his top dozen Booker from all the past winners, shortlist and long list, of which he reckoned there were 539 books in all. I haven't read anywhere in that either, but what I've got here is not really a dozen, little more than a dozen books from the last 40, 50 years of Booker Prize. Shortlist only I took. I did the long list, which is too many. So I looked at winners and shortlisted books and came out with sort of a little bit more than a baker's dozen worth of books, remember. But what this is great is that I think, well, there's some recency bias, but not a whole lot. There is some trends and some books that I think have really fallen out of fashion. And I will end, I don't often do this, but I will end with the top three, my three favorite books that have either been shortlisted or won the Booker Prize in all the time that I've been reading. Okay, let's go back early on. I've got two books here that are almost completely forgotten, both winners of the Booker Prize from sort of 73 and 1973 and 1976, 78, I'm not sure which. First is The Siege of Krishnapur by J.G. Farrell, and I'm pairing that with Paul Scott's Staying On. Paul Scott would be better known for the Jewel and the Crown quartet, which I hadn't read. This is the only Paul Scott that I've read. I read this in school. We were given this and in a sort of discussion class, not in my actual literature class, but in a general discussion class that some people were studying literature, some weren't, and we read Paul Scott Staying On. And I pair these together because it's a trend that has very much fallen out of fashion. So if you think of the early 70s, about 30 years after India's independence, and there was a lot of books being written about India by white men who were either remembering their parents or remembering, sort of going back 30 years in time and talking about that period. And I think these have rightly been replaced over the years by a significant number of Indian authors writing about India. Originally, before the Booker Prize went wholly international and was Commonwealth only, there was every year there was one or two books written by Indian authors. Salman Rushdie made his first big came to notice through the Booker Prize, and over the years been a number. Aravind Adiga, one for the White Tiger. There've been a lot of India-based books, and usually by authors from India. But back in the day, when white people had zero F's to give, we saw books like this. Now, the reason I mention it is because they have perhaps rightly fallen out of fashion, but I have very strong memories of both these books. And if you ever want to go back and look at the history of Booker, the books themselves, I don't think are at fault. The whole trend that white people were the ones telling this history, or at least not telling the history, at least writing fiction about it, that may be consigned to the history bins, but actually both these books are worth your time. That's Paul Scott's Staying On, which won the Booker Prize, and Siege of Krishnapur by J.G. Farrell, which won the Booker Prize. Okay, moving forwards. Some of these books are just great books that have been forgotten, and some of them are very meaningful to me. So, Empire of the Sun by J.G. Ballard was nominated, didn't win the Booker Prize, and controversial this time because is it a novel? It's very much an autobiography of J.G. There's a young boy named Jim who is interned in a prisoner of war camp, and this is exactly what happened to J.G. Ballard. So while this is a fiction, there's actually a follow-up which is much more autobiographical, called The Kindness of Women, and the two go as a pair. But in 1985, this was billed as a novel and understood as such, and it later became a film. Steven Spielberg directed the film with a very young Christian Bale, I think, in his first role. But I read this because I was studying when I was doing my O-levels, so at the end of 10th grade, in the UK, you do a series of exams, and I was studying English literature, and I wrote my long essay on J.G. Ballard's Empire of the Sun. So I read this forwards and backwards, and then wrote an extensive essay about what's going on here. So it's very meaningful to me, and it might be one of the first actual new hardbacks. I didn't buy this. My mum must have bought this for me. It's got my name printed down neatly there, saying March 1985. So I did my O levels in 1985, and I remember this very fondly. This was a real introduction to what literature could do, what historical fiction could do, what the crossover between fiction and memoir fiction and biography, what that actually was, and how you could play with the form, and a great read, and kind of forgotten. I don't know if anyone's reading Empire of the Sun today, but still recommended. Okay, moving on from there, a book which you may be expected. I've spoken about this book before, as I think it's his most significant work and a powerful book on its own right. This is Martin Amis's Time's Arrow, which was shortlisted for the Booker, and I think his finest work is a slim book. So I think this is accessible to anybody, people who may have heard things about Martin Amis and decided that he's not for them. This is a very accessible book that will not take up much of your time. The shtick of the book, if you like, is that time runs backwards through it. It's set during the Second World War. It's set in a concentration camp, and because time runs backwards, it's set in a doctor working in a concentration camp, and people come into the doctor sick and leave perfectly healthy. And of course, this is time running backwards, because the reality is that in the concentration camps there were experiments done on human beings, and so the whole idea of the upside downness of time being a metaphor for the upside downness of Nazi ideology and the treatment of other humans and in general man's inhumanity to man, I think plays out here in 150 pages and is a quite remarkable novel. So I like that very much. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. I know Martin Amis isn't everyone's cup of tea, but if you ever have a hankering to try Amis and read, I think one of the great books addressing the Nazi atrocities, then Time's Arrow is a book for you. Another one which I think I've spoken about a fair bit, but also kind of lost in time, despite the fact this was a remarkable winner in its time and sold like gangbusters, and I don't think it's ever crossed over to America. I don't think people coming now to Booker Prize remember it very well, but I will highly recommend Roddy Doyle's Paddy Clock. Ha ha ha! It's a devastating work by an Irish author who'd previously written the trilogy, The Commitments, The Snapper, and The Van, all of which were made into movies. The Commitments, famously directed by Alan Parker, a fantastic movie, but the other movies are great as well. But as a trilogy, the Barrytown trilogy, I think, holds up today. And this was his first novel after completing that trilogy, and it's an astonishing book about a young boy growing up in Dublin, and through his eyes, it's a very sort of childish mindset and trying to make sense of the world, what's going on around him with his parents and with his life. Absolutely devastating. Leading up, Paddy Clock, ha ha ha, is kind of a punchline. In many ways, it's a secret that is revealed. Why this is said and what it refers to. It's a part of a rhyme that is aimed at young Paddy in the playground. Devastating book by an author that kind of, I think, doesn't get read very much these days. So recommend that if you're looking into the history of the Booker. I think this is a very strong contender. I've got here a book I picked out. I think this is probably her strongest book. This is a very fated author, very widely read author today, and spoken about a lot on BookTube. I've read all her novels and a couple of her collections, a short story collection and essay collection, and I think this is her greatest novel to date. There's a lot of talk about her first novel, White Teeth, was a runaway success, and then she sort of stumbled a bit with The Autograph Man, and came back with On Beauty, which on paper might not have shown much promise. This is, Zadie Smith had success, an author, went off to the States and worked in college as a professor. And this is a campus novel set in America about somebody working in a university. And so you think, okay, she's looking for content, looking for material, and in some ways, I guess NW, which comes after this, is a return to her roots in a sort of more down-to-earth book than On Beauty. But this was just an exquisite read. And again, I think a lot of the focus perhaps on White Teeth and then whatever else she's putting out next. And she's got a new novel this year. I'm super excited. But I recommend, if you're interested in Zadie Smith's back catalogue, I would highly recommend On Beauty. You can definitely skip The Autograph Man, but I would recommend On Beauty and NW. And there's another one since then, I don't remember, but definitely On Beauty. Okay, after that, again, a sort of another left turn here, a book that more widely read, I think, in the US than in the UK, but ended up on the Booker shortlist. It must have been just after they opened it up and started including books more around the world. And this is Patrick DeWitt's The Sisters Brothers. There was a film made of this, so this was a sort of literary success, but didn't sell huge. And then they made a film, which was a tiny independent film, which nobody saw. But I had an absolute riot reading this. This is from, I've got 1 second, 2011. Absolutely love this, and very fond memories of this sort of joyous neo-Western about two brothers and how they make their way in the world, and the dodgy people they meet and the dodgy behavior that they perpetrate. Really absolutely fantastic whiz-bang read that was just something different, I think, to a lot of the sort of modern literature, in inverted commas, that falls, arrives on the Booker shortlist and arrives on those tables at the front of shops when you go looking for something new. Sisters Brothers by Patrick DeWitt. I haven't read anything since by Patrick DeWitt. I know he's still writing. I know he's received a lot of critical acclaim, but I recommend people go back and find this. Another shortlisted book, which I couldn't leave off, but kind of obvious, massive booktube YouTube favorite, Hanya Yanagihara's A Little Life. This is what, 600, 700 pages, 700 odd pages. I read the last 500 pages of this in one sitting. Literally, I remember sitting on the couch over there and not being able to stop reading. Wept, just literally ended up like a wrung out dish rag by the end of it. It's powerful, perhaps a little manipulative, but there's something about the strength of the characters, about poor Jude and Willem, and finding happiness and having it snatched away. And many people have dismissed this as sort of misery porn. I actually took away from this the joys and the highs of life. There is a whole scene in the middle where Jude is adopted. Jude, as an adult, is adopted by his closest friends and confidant. So is one of his mentors in the law. And it just even thinking about it makes me tear up, because it was such a wonderful moment of extending of love and respect. And then also just the four main characters, the feelings they have for each other over time. And I'm at an age now where I have friends that I've known since I'm 8, and since I'm 15, and since I'm 18, and those relationships remain powerful and meaningful, and so that kind of resonated with me. So yes, there is some genuine sadness and all the trigger warnings before you attempt this, but there is joy and delight to be found inside Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. And then, as I say, I've got some recency bias. I kind of fell out of love with the Booker Prize and didn't, after a couple of years where I read the entire shortlist, never read the whole long list, and didn't find books that I was really enjoying. And so I sort of decided, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. I haven't even read the last couple of winners. I didn't read Shuggie Bain because it just sounded like something that I was going to bring me down a little bit, even though I heard it's marvelous, and I'm sure it is. But last year, I accidentally, without trying, I think ended up reading 3 books on the shortlist, and all 3 of them I thought were outstanding. None of them won. But if we're talking about the best of the Booker, then I definitely want to talk about The Trees by Percival Everett, which is just, to me, one of the great 21st century novels. Love that. Also, Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These, which I really loved and lent to everybody, which sent me back to reading Foster, which I think is even more exquisite. And I'm looking for her earlier short story collections. I'm sure I'm going to find those as soon as I start buying books again and go through those. And then I thought 2 from the same year was thing. And then I remembered that I really did love Treacle Walker as well. And so I wanted to bring that up as well. Again, not everyone's cup of tea, just weird enough and sort of folklore enough to tickle my fancy, with also this sense of British comics that I read in the 70s and how they were different from sort of Marvel and DC superhero comics. There's something very parochial and small about the world that Alan Garnett is painting here. Okay, it's a whole ton of books. I've stopped counting how many. And then my top three book of books that have been either shortlisted or won. Do I do these in order? Maybe. Let's count down from 3 to 1. In third place, I'm going to put, I don't know, 3 to 1. This is what you're getting. In third place, I'm going to put Earthly Powers by Anthony Burgess. I think I've spoken about this before. It's just magnificent. It's almost completely forgotten. Burgess is barely mentioned except in the context of A Clockwork Orange these days. But Earthly Powers just missed out on winning the Booker Prize in the year it was on the shortlist. And it's just an outstanding work that I say is mostly forgotten, mainly unread. But if you ever have a hankering to go back and read works by dead old white men from the UK, I think this should be at the top of your list. After that, I have a book which changed the way I think about books. It was the best example of an unreliable narrator that I've ever read at a time where I didn't really understand that concept. I think maybe I'd read Wuthering Heights, but this blew that out of the water, and I think stands the test of time. But somehow in this author's work, in this Nobel Prize winning author's work, this seems to be relegated behind what I think is not as good a book. I'm talking, of course, about The Remains of the Day. People seem to talk about Never Let Me Go because it's got sort of dystopian elements to it. But this, I think, is just everything works. This is an almost perfect novel, which I adored at the time and think back very fondly of. It's also an astonishing movie featuring perhaps one of the top three performances by an actor I've ever seen. Anthony Hopkins, for which he didn't win an Oscar for that. He's won 2 other Oscars. Emma Thompson's in it as well. Just a great movie, but the book, above all, you should read The Remains of the Day, because it's, I think, the greatest work by one of our great authors and a Nobel Prize winning laureate. And then the one I'm putting at the top, again, somehow, this seems to be almost completely forgotten and discarded by BookTube. I rarely hear anyone talking about it, and yet it blew me away when I read it. It double blew me away when I got to the end of it, and it continues to blow me away. It's been made into an Oscar-winning movie. It's been made into a stage show, I believe, and yet no one talks about the book Life of Pi by Jan Martel. And if you've got to this point, you're disappointed that I'm talking about Life of Pi, then I'm sorry. But this struck me as, again, an almost perfect work of literature, where we have Pi trapped in a boat with a tiger called Richard Parker, and the whole story of how he survives being shipwrecked and many days on the boat, the adventures, the grazing, the hallucinogenic experiences that he goes through, the trying to eat tiger poop, everything, this mad, weird story, which then takes an additional, after you've gone through all this and wrenched these experiences and to live with Pi on the boat with this tiger, the ending, the way the tiger, I think, I have to go back and look. I think when he reaches land, the tiger sort of slinks off and disappears, and there's no real resolution to what happens to the tiger. No spoilers. But then, when Pi is in hospital recuperating, and he's visited, and is being asked to tell the story and corroborate the facts as they become clear to the people who are attending him, there is an additional twist, and my heart came out of my mouth at the thought that maybe all of this was not as it seemed, and that survivor's guilt, everything that Pi had gone through, the trauma and the stress of what he'd gone through, actually we had witnessed something entirely different than that we had taken at face value. And maybe too many spoilers, but I just think this is a superbly constructed, beautifully written, and astonishingly completed work of fiction. And maybe the reason no one talks about it is because everyone's read it, and it's an obvious, and everyone, I don't have to wear that by A Little Life, everyone's read, maybe. But if you have never read Life of Pi, then I give it my highest recommendation. And that is my book 15 dozen. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Bye.